Hey Wargamers, today we're going to talk about the Kroot Hunting Pack detachment in the 10th edition Tau Codex. Now, of course, this is the detachment for you if you want to field as many Kroot as possible, but there's more to it than that. And indeed, a lot of people are skeptical about this detachment in terms of its feasibility in a competitive environment. But today we are going to talk about its strengths, its weaknesses, and why there might be more to the Kroot Hunting Pack than meets the eye. Why this detachment might have a little bit more teeth or a little bit more beak, if you will, than you might anticipate, and how playing the Kroot Hunting Pack detachment might require a different point of view in order to be effective. So let's get into it, starting with the detachment rule. It has two. The first is Hunter's Instincts. Basically gives you +1 to hit and +1 to wound if a target is below starting and half strength. So basically, if you are targeting a unit at full strength, you get nothing. But as soon as there's blood in the water, you get +1 to hit. And then once that unit is below half strength, you get +1 to wound as well. And that is a pretty big proportional increase on a lot of Kroot profiles, right? Kroot profiles are generally fairly mediocre. Not a slight to the Kroot. I love Kroot, but they're hitting on fours, right? Just like our boys in blue, and +1 to hit is a big proportional increase over that baseline of missing half your shots. So hitting on threes for shooting, hitting on twos in melee for a lot of Kroot profiles. Again, there's going to be some exceptions. That's a reasonable, if not significant, increase just in their baseline ability due to this detachment roll. It does mean that you are looking for opportunities to trigger this benefit at the lowest cost, right? Like you want to have like one model fall down on a unit. You want to have just a little bit of damage done in order to trigger this for the rest of your army, right? You're not looking to pour a whole lot of shooting in it just to get that benefit for another. You really want MSU pokes, right? You want little plinks here and there to kind of get the ball rolling, and like I say, get some blood in the water, get these Kroot boys all hyped up. And one of the ways that you can do that is with Kroot riders, right? So this is one of the first things that stands out to me looking at the Kroot hunting pack, is that it actually provides a really good reason to bring Kroot because they have this ability that allows them to shoot back outside of your turn and potentially do some damage when a nearby Kroot unit is targeted by shooting. So they can return fire, cause this Hunter's Instinct to kick in, and allow you your full army to pour into that with the benefit of +1 to hit right off the bat on your next turn. So using things like Kroot or small units of Kroot Hounds or Lone Spears, or even other units in the Codex, right? Like stealth teams or strike teams or other small units, you can instigate this benefit fairly easily and maximize this benefit for your army as a whole, right? You're not pouring in a ton of shots just to get the benefit for something else. You are investing a very small amount to get this benefit for a larger gain overall. So that's Hunter's Instinct. I think it would be better if it just started right off the bat, but having the ability to trigger this fairly easily from a bunch of different sources makes this much more reasonable than you might first expect. The second detachment rule is Skirmish Fighters, and this gives you a 5-up invulnerable against ranged attacks or a 6-up invulnerable against melee attacks. Basically, it means that carnivores don't care about cover, right? That they are going to be getting a 5-up save out in the open. They normally just have their normal 6-up save, but now they have a 5-up save, which is going to be the same as they would have with cover anyway. So you're looking at something that makes carnivores a little bit faster, a little bit more flexible in that way. Also, having a 5-up invuln is going to be pretty, a big step up really from your standard 6-up save. So you're getting a lot more durability just built in, at least doubling the number of survivors. And then it also gives things like Kroot or other larger models a bit more durability, right? Giving them that invulnerable save protects them from those generally, multi-damage, higher AP weapons that they wouldn't necessarily have protection from otherwise, right? Especially if we're thinking about like our rampagers. They have multiple wounds, and they're going to be a giant magnet for your lascans, your missile pods, anything that has multiple damage on it. This is going to give them a little bit more durability that they might not have otherwise. It's a little odd that it's weaker in melee. It makes sense, right? If the whole idea is that they're skirmishing, they're scrappy, so they're hard to shoot at. It makes sense that it would be a little bit weaker in melee because of that conceptualization. But as a functional rule, it would be nice if Kroot had this ability, F5 up and vuln saving combat too, just because they're not, they're not exactly the toughest boys on the tabletop, right? So giving them a 5++ in combat would have been nice as well. But either way, this still has some pretty decent value to it. Obviously, the detachment only applies to Kroot, right? Hopefully that almost goes without saying, right? But you're not going to get these benefits for your crisis suits or anything like that if you bring them. But it does really, suggest that this detachment is meant to be filled with Kroot as much as possible, right? So bring lots of Kroot. That gives you lots of board control, gives you lots of opportunity for tar pitting. Getting Kroot on the tabletop gives you a totally different play style than we are used to as Tau players, right? You are not playing a Tau army with maybe a little sprinkling of Kroot. You're playing a Kroot army with maybe a sprinkling of Tau. It's completely flipped, and the playstyle is largely different because of that. And so we're going to be using our Tau allies here for durability, for heavy weapons, for filling the niches or niches that the Kroot themselves cannot play. They are the auxiliaries to the Kroot this time around. And so we have to be thinking about them as such and not necessarily getting too focused on the Kroot just themselves. Realize that the Kroot are going to be kind of the main characters of the show, but still pulling in some of these select Tau units to really make the army function as a whole. Right, and so in a Kroot hunting pack detachment, you're going to have a lot to keep track of. You're going to have all your Kroot things going on. You're going to have all your Tau stuff going on. It's a lot of bookkeeping, right? And I want to share something with you. This isn't a sponsorship or anything. I just said that I would give this Etsy shop a shout out. Grotskullworkshop produces these tokens, these markers that you can use to help keep track of, every little component of your Tau army, whether you're playing Kroot detachment or not. And they're pretty nice. They're very reasonably priced and everything like that. But we do have a 15% off discount code if you check out their Etsy shop. Go ahead, use it. Invasive24 for 15% off. It makes these things only a few bucks really to pick up a pack, and they have all sorts of different groupings of different tokens and stuff. So if you're interested, check it out. Like I said, not a sponsorship. I'm not getting paid for this or anything, but I think they're useful tools, so check them out. So as is the way of things now, we have 4 different enhancements we can pick from. 3 of these I think are pretty decent, if not good. One of them I think is not as great, maybe a little lackluster. Play along at home, see if you can guess which one it is. And these can be given to your Kroot characters, right? There aren't any that will apply to a Tau character, so you can't, bring a Fireblade with one of these or a Cold Star Commander with one of these. It does have to be a Kroot character, which is thematic and it makes sense for the Kroot detachment. Now, the first one is the Kroot Hawk Flock. Say that 10 times fast. I have in trying to record this thing. Basically, it gives you ignores cover for the unit and 12-inch deep strike denial for the bearer. So you can't have anyone deep strike within 12 inches of the bearer, and both of these things are good, right? Like both of these are totally useful things in almost all circumstances. So you want to have these as assets in your army list, and so you could put these on any Kroot character, whether it's a Shaper or a Lone Spear, but I really do think the Lone Spears are the ones that benefit the most from this. Having ignores cover on their sniper weapon is very useful. Also, having 12-inch deep strike denial is really good for a solitary model, right? If we think about something like a Trail Shaper, where we might want to have this otherwise too, having it on him if he's joined to a unit doesn't gain you as much, right? Because a lot of your unit is going to be doing screening for you anyway. You're not gaining as much bubble. But on a single model like the Lone Spear, which has a decent sized base too, keep in mind, that 12-inch deep strike denial bubble actually gains you a lot more, right? Like you're not being redundant with the rest of the unit that's joined to. You are being a wholly isolated and independent bubble of deep strike denial onto your own. So you're gaining a lot there. And given the fact that your Lone Spear, if you're taking the sniper loadout, is going to be kind of hanging out maybe in back and a little bit more of a potentially vulnerable position to things like deep strike, having that denial on it is going to be really useful, not only for bird control, but also for preserving that critical component of your Kroot army. Keep in mind, Lone Spears allow you massive force multiplication when they hit something. So being able to reroll all your hits with your entire army against the target of the Lone Spear is a really, really useful really useful thing. And so you want your Lone Spears to stay alive. Taking a Kroot Hawk Flock with them is a really good way to do that. And this is the only enhancement that the Lone Spears can take. All the other three are specific to each of the three Shaper types. So something to think about. You're almost always going to want to bring the Kroot Hawk Flock, whether you're bringing Lone Spears or not, but you probably are going to take a Lone Spear because of their benefits. So yeah, this is basically an auto-include in most cases, I think. Next one is Nomadic Hunter. It's for Trail Shapers. It gives them +3 movement and assault for their unit. Having faster units that also have assault is almost always useful, whether we're talking about objective control or getting in range for shooting, or as we can see later, potentially other things as well. So having this movement buff and assault on a unit makes a lot of sense and is almost always useful, especially on a unit like Kroot that isn't going to really want to sit still and hunker down. It does allow carnivores to grab objectives a little faster, and because they have sticky objectives, that makes a bigger difference, right? It's not like they have to sit there on the objective and get shot at. They can grab it and then continue on, right? They can keep moving forward and doing other things. That's the name of the game for the Kroot hunting pack detachment. So also a very good one for Trail Shapers. Root Carved Weapons. This is for your War Shaper, right? This is supposed to be your combat expert Shaper. It gives the Shaper precision and devastating wounds, which are both fantastic rules, right? Like you want to have those, but it's on a single model, and the War Shaper himself is fairly underwhelming in terms of his combat potential. The dart bow would be one thing that we'd really want to see this on, right? As a shooting weapon, as a ranged weapon, the dart bow could be a really useful thing to have precision and devastating wounds on, but it doesn't have a very high rate of fire, and it's AP dash. So having precision or devastating wounds on AP dash is, or rather, precision on AP dash is not necessarily that exciting. So you don't get quite as much out of this as you really would like, and the potential for the devastating wound proc is not very high because you're not firing that many shots. So it's a little bit of a miss there. Blade Staff has 4 attacks with lethal hits, strength 5, -1 AP, 2 damage. That's someplace where that could be good, right? Like getting more opportunity for procs. -1 AP, 2 damage for precision is good. Like that's a place where maybe we would actually see this is with a Blade Staff loadout, but it's a close combat weapon, right? You have to get in to combat, and you're not necessarily going to have that many opportunities to use it. So the total benefit that you're getting from this is probably fairly low because it's constrained to melee attacks on a single model. So I think this one is the miss. So I guess take a shot or take some points if you guess that one, or tell me why I'm wrong in the comments below, of course. And then the Borthrod Gland is for Flesh Shapers. Basically gives their unit crits on 5+ to hit, which is good, right? Flesh Shapers have basically an ability that procs on crits, so having their unit proc on 5s for crits is great. Basically means you get sustained hits 1 on melee whenever you hit a 5 to hit, so 5 or 6, so that's great, right? That's a pretty big force multiplier for that particular trait in any unit with a Flesh Shaper. So that's really good. And it stacks nicely with Nomadic Hunter, particularly in a 20-man unit, right? Like, I mean, not particularly, exclusively in a 20-man unit, right? We can't have multiple enhancements on a single character, so you need to have 2 characters here. You need to have a Trail Shaper and a Flesh Shaper. You can have a 20-man unit of carnivores led by 2 different characters, and so you could have your Trail Shaper with Nomadic Hunter, you could have your Flesh Shaper with the Gland leading a single unit, and that's a nice little bomb of Kroot that can run, advance, shoot, run, charge, get sustained hits 1 on 5 up. Like, you can do a lot of damage with this potentially, and so that little bomb of 20-man carnivores led by a Flesh Shaper and a Trail Shaper, both with their enhancements, could do a lot of work potentially. And so those 2, I think, would pair very nicely, but also work fairly well on their own as well. Speaking about big units of carnivores, let's get to our stratagems. The first one is Join the Hunt. It's the only 2 CP stratagem in the detachment. It is a battle tactic, not that that really matters for this detachment. Allows you to return a destroyed infantry or hound unit to the board, or rather into strategic reserves. Doesn't work for any characters, so even if you bring a big 20-man unit of carnivores with their different shapers, you're not getting the characters, you're just getting the carnivores themselves. But for a 20-man unit of carnivores, that's a nice chunk of your army to come back, and you can get some good utility out of that. So you're probably going to use it on your more expensive units, your larger units, right? For 2 CP, you'd really want that return on your investment. But being able to bring units back from the dead is always a good thing, right? It makes your army bigger than it seems, right? It's bigger on the inside, or something like that. A Trap Well Laid is a 1 CP battle tactic. Basically, you pick a Kroot unit before it shoots or fights, so you can use this both in your turn or your opponent's turn, or both. One of the targets that they hit, you get +1 AP for all their attacks against that from the rest of your army. So as soon as you hit something with your chosen unit, everyone else gets +1 AP. Again, another platform for MSU, right? Whether it's a Krootox or a Lone Spear or something else, right? You're getting some utility here just from having a little bit of poking damage, a little bit of plinking damage to hit something to trigger a benefit. And that's really one of the underlying themes of this detachment, is that you want to kind of have this scrappy kind of picking cagey play style, and like a bird, right? Like you can kind of think about a bunch of vultures or something coming around, kind of picking at something and pulling it around, and that's exactly how I think this is meant to play. Very thematic in that way, right? So +1 AP for all our attacks. Wonderful benefit. You want to use this basically as much as possible, up to 3 times per battle round if you have the CP for it. Right? So you're going to use it on your turn, on your opponent's turn, as much as you can, basically. And you're going to get a lot of benefit out of that, because your AP on most of your weapons is pretty bad, right? So getting +1 AP on something that's normally AP dash carries a lot of weight. So we're getting a lot of mileage out of this. It is only for the round in which that occurs, right? So you can't like set something up for later. It does have to be within the phase that you are triggering this in. So that's why I say 3 times per battle round. But even so, like, you're getting a lot of utility out of that. It stacks really well with a Lone Spear, right? Lone Spear gives you rerolls to hit, and if you do this as well, you're getting +1 AP. Rerolls to hit +1 AP, and then +1 to hit if you're, assuming you've taken something off of the unit, making it below starting strength. Like, that's a really nice little package there to offer up to, the entirety of your army. So a trap well laid, I think, is something you're going to use as much as freaking possible, because that's a serious benefit. Another stratagem that is pretty cool, but you're not going to use nearly as much as the Grisly Feast. Now, that's a 1 CP strategic ploy. Basically, you pick a Kroot unit that has destroyed a unit in the fight phase. Notice I say the fight phase. It's either your fight phase or your opponent's fight phase. Either one you can use it in. And you pick that unit, and then in your opponent's next command phase, they have to take a battle shock test for every unit that's within 6 inches of that selected Kroot unit. If that unit is below half strength, they get a -1 to that test as well. And so you have some pretty big opportunities here, especially with a larger unit. That's a really big footprint that you could potentially, induce battle shock. And of course, the big benefits there are, no stratagems, 0 OC, and so that could be a really big benefit if played in the right time and place. However, it's not a sure outcome, right? You are forcing a test, not a specified outcome, and so those types of things are always up in the air and are pretty a pretty risky investment in terms of CP, right? Especially when you have other things that you could potentially use it for to potentially more benefit. But if you use this in your opponent's turn, right, in a place where, let's say, you're in a prolonged combat and you have a Kroot unit that has wiped out the last remnants of a different unit in your opponent's turn, you can use this stratagem and then take your turn to position your Kroot to affect as many opposing units as possible, right? Because the battle shock test takes place in your opponent's next command phase. So you have a whole turn here to maybe make some cool stuff happen in terms of selecting who, when, where, how, and what gets battle shocked. So you could position in a way that it gets the most units, or particularly focuses on a particular objective, something like that. So a cunning play of the Grisly Feast could be a game changer if the dice are in your favor, right? So it's situational, but has a potential for high impact. Again, it's something that I think you're probably not going to use that often because it is situational and because it is not a guaranteed outcome, but it's worth keeping in mind, right? Don't sleep on the Grisly Feast, because that could swing the game in your favor in a time when you really need it. EMP grenades kind of has the opposite problem. It's a 1 CP war gear strat. Basically, you pick an enemy vehicle that's within 8 inches of a Kroot grenades unit, and that vehicle unit has 1 worse ballistic skill or weapon skill, which is good, right? Like, -1 ballistic skill weapon skill is appreciated. It's going to make your units more survivable. So especially if you have a vehicle that has just a ton of guns on it, that's going to shoot in a bunch of different directions, like that's going to be helpful, right? And because it's affecting the weapon skill or ballistic skill, that does stack with things like stealth or other modifiers. You're not running into the cap at like -1 to hit or anything like that. So you are getting some nice potential utility here, especially because Kroot do have stealth now and so are harder to hit. So you get some good mileage on that, but you have to have the Kroot in the right place at the right time, and it's not necessarily going to save you, right? So it has potential value. It's something, again, to keep in mind, but I think a lot of these other stratagems are probably going to have more utility in most matchups, right? Like if you're going against a particular list that has a vehicle that you're really nervous about, use EMP grenades, but otherwise, kind of keep some of these other stratagems more at your fingertips. And moving on to our last 2 stratagems, we start with Guerrilla Warriors. It's a 1 CP strategic ploy. You select a Kroot unit and they can fall back, shoot, and charge. Great. Love that. Always a good rule, right? Especially on things like rampagers that can do all of those things, right? We have some nice javelins. We got, some giant Guerrilla Kroot fists that can go and pummel guys, and of course we get those Hammer of Wrath attacks as well. So really some useful utility here for Guerrilla Warriors on your rampagers, but basically anywhere you use this is probably going to be worth it, right? But especially on those rampagers. Big question is just like how many models are you going to have left, right? You don't have a ton of durability, and so is it really going to be that useful given the size of your unit and how much damage you're potentially going to be able to do? That's the biggest thing. Otherwise, use this thing as much as you want, because it's that fallback shoot charge is something that games are won on. So that's a great stratagem if you find a suitable target for it. Hidden Hunters is 1 CP, strategic ploy. Selected crew unit can only be shot within 12 inches. Again, a really strong stratagem for a unit that you need to protect, right? This is not something you're necessarily going to be, dishing out every turn for any old unit. But if you have some key units that you want to keep alive because they don't have armor, right? Making it so that they can't be shot unless you're within 12 inches is great. It's a great way to keep things alive. So overall, I think a lot of these stratagems are good. None of them are amazing though, because of the units that they can be used on, right? They're still being used on Kroot. Like, all these stratagems have some clear value in them, some more than others, but the biggest weakness is, the units that you're potentially using them on may not be able to get as much bang for your buck as you would hope. Things like the trap, guerrilla, hunters, those three stratagems I think are really solid force multipliers and things that you're going to want to basically use as much as possible, but you're still using it on Kroot, right? They're not these amazing godly units that are going to be completely broken by using stratagems. And they really shouldn't be, right? Like, that's not good game design. But nonetheless, these stratagems are good force multipliers. They are not Death Star makers, is kind of my point, right? Like, they're force multipliers, not Death Star makers, and they can make Kroot a lot trickier than they may appear. So, don't overestimate these stratagems as far as their output, but don't underestimate them either, right? These are solid stratagems that can make your Kroot do more than you might expect. All right, so with all the mechanics of the detachment broken down, let's talk about units that excel in the Kroot hunting pack. Now, this is a conversation I'm having independent of points value. It's based more on the conceptualization and the battlefield role of different units, not so much based on their points, because points will change over the course of the Codex. So keep that in mind depending on when you're watching this. Now, of course, all Kroot are going to be things that do well in the Kroot hunting pack. They all benefit from the rules of the detachment, and so, yeah, they're going to be better here than they would be otherwise, right? And each Kroot unit has a pretty well-defined role in the Codex, right? They all do things distinct and special, right? Like, Farstalkers are your infiltrators, and carnivores are your troops, and rampagers are your charge and beat 'em up guys, and your lone spears are your snipers, and blah blah blah, right? Like, all those things are better in the hunting pack than they would be otherwise. But amongst the Kroot selection, we see things like Krootox do really, really well because of their ability to instigate that initial benefit of +1 to hit. We get carnivores as being really useful because, of course, they're going to be the meat and potatoes of your list, right? Like, being able to use relatively mediocre profiles and get them amped up to a place where they can do some work is really useful, right? Their strength in numbers with the carnivores. Trail Shapers, because of their ability to reposition your units and the way that they affect kind of your deployment trickery and mobility on the tabletop, is really important. And so Trail Shapers here are even better than they are outside of this detachment. And then lone spears, with the enhancement, with the Kroot Hawk Flock enhancement, are great. Of course, you can only have one of those, but still, lone spear with Kroot Hawk is I think pretty clutch in this detachment, more so than they are normally. And given the number of Kroot units that you have, their power only grows with the more Kroot you bring, right? If you only have one unit of Kroot, having a lone spear is fine, right? Like you're helping that one unit. But if you have a whole army of Kroot, having a lone spear has benefit for your whole army. And so you're getting much more out of it the more Kroot you bring. And so lone spears, of course, are going to be better here than they would be otherwise. Aside from the Kroot, what are you going to bring, right? I said that the Kroot are the focus, the emphasis, the reason why you want to bring the Kroot hunting pack, but they can't be the only thing in your list, right? Like we need to look at other things to supplement the wonderful things that Kroot can do. So in particular, thinking about anti-tank, right? We don't have a lot of heavy weaponry in the Kroot roster. The heavy weaponry we do have is not very good. And so we want something that punches a little bit harder. And if it can have some durability and mobility inside of that, that's even better, right? Because this army is conceptualized as being relatively fast moving, we want to have things that can kind of move up all at the same time and provide target saturation, provide aggressive pressure, and work alongside the Kroot, not have kind of a disjointed battlefield role or mobility. So we want to have a cohesive strategy. Things like piranhas, fast as heck, right? Crisis suits can also be very fast if they have a cold start, for example. So you can get a lot of mobility out of them that way. And if you're bringing like Sunforged crisis suits, you're going to be packing a punch, right? These are clear niches that are vacant in the Kroot army list, and these units can help make them stronger, right? They can fill those missing roles. And so things like piranhas, crisis suits are things that I would expect to see show up alongside Kroot if you're bringing this detachment. Also things that are backline, long-range units, riptides, ghost kills, broadsides, all those can, give you some heavy firepower, but also can kind of hang back and maintain board control despite having your Kroot wave moving forward. So maintaining that board control by having those riptides, ghost kills, broadsides hang out and back, do that deep strike denial alongside your lone spears, let's say, is going to give you a good battlefield presence. Finally, let's talk about some tactical considerations you might want to take into account when designing your list or playing your Kroot hunting pack army. Now, Kroot are the stars, right? That's why we're bringing the detachment. They're probably at least the majority of your list, but they're definitely not the whole thing, right? They're not the whole cast of the show. You still need to bring those Tau units that we just talked about in order to really round out the list. And so consider this a Kroot heavy alternative to Mon Ka, perhaps, right? You're still doing a lot of things that Mon Ka might do in terms of being aggressive and cagey and being fast, but you're doing it in a different way. You're doing it in a Kroot way, not a Tau way, really. And you still need those Tau units for some support and making the big plays, but you're playing this, from the perspective of a Shaper, not from the perspective of a Shazo. When we're doing that, we want to move and swarm, right? We are being pack animals. We are, swarming different parts of the board, keeping forward pressure, enforcing target saturation. One of the worst things that we can do is just put out a few, units at a time, kind of like this titration of units just to be mowed down one at a time. What we really want is multiple units, swarming on one part of the board in order to do the most damage and, really force our opponent to make some tough choices. In order for this to work, we need the sticky objectives on the carnivores, right? And this is one of the reasons why carnivores are so good in this list, is because their sticky objectives allow you to touch the objective and move on and do the other things that you need to do. And one of those things is going to be, like I said, swarming units or objectives And the mantra you want to stick to is that the best kill is overkill, right? That you're not going to have a lot of opportunity to make a choice where you're not investing everything you have into a particular unit, right? You can't depend on a single unit of carnivores to clear out a lot of different types of units. So you need to put in multiple units in order to really force that outcome and use the law of large numbers to get the result you want. Alongside that, you want your hunting pack to be surprising. You can't just walk up the board and hope that everything's going to turn out okay. You need to use stratagems like Hidden Hunters or your redeploy from your Trail Shaper in order to mess with your opponent's expectations. Not put yourself in a place where you're easily countered, but instead have a shifting deployment such that your opponent doesn't have their best assets levied against you in the most opportune place, right? And so these tools that we have need to be utilized in order to keep your Kroot alive and do the things you want to do. Things like taking multiple Trail Shapers and pulling everything to one side of the board, doing a denied flank is one way to do this. And so strategies like that, I think, are really important for playing an army that otherwise is going to be sorely, outgunned and out durabilitied. I don't know. You know what I'm saying. You figure that part out, I guess. But you know what? Yeah, they're squishy boys, right? That's the main point. All right. So this video has gone on long enough. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is the Kroot hunting pack something you want to bring? Is it not? Why? Let's have a conversation about it. If you've used Kroot hunting pack, what are the things that worked out best for you? These are some ideas that I think make a lot of sense. But if I've missed something, I'm sure you'll let me know. As always, thanks for watching and happy wargaming. If you stuck around to this point in the video, maybe you want to join our Discord community as well. There's a link in the description below. Special thanks to all my supporters over on Patreon, but especially the folks that you see on your screen now. If you want to help make more invasive wargaming videos, consider joining our community over there as well.